A track star vanished on her way to an awards banquet in 2004. 17-year-old Lydia Coleman, the fastest runner in Oregon, just disappeared into thin air. Her car was found running on the highway, but she was gone forever. 8 years later, a diver is cleaning out a sunken school bus from the bottom of the Columbia River when he makes a discovery that changes everything. Hidden inside a waterlogged seat, he finds Lydia's flash drive, completely intact after all these years underwater. But when he finally listens to what's on it, he realizes this wasn't just a missing person case. Lydia had been secretly recording voice diaries because she was terrified of someone she trusted. Her recordings reveal a dark network that goes way beyond one missing girl. Other teen athletes had vanished across 3 states, all connected to the same trusted sports officials who were supposed to protect them. What did Lydia discover that made someone want her gone? And how many other young athletes paid the ultimate price for trying to speak the truth? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Nate Alvarez surfaced from the Columbia River with salt-stained hands and a waterproof flash drive that would change everything. At 35, the former Navy diver had rebuilt his life around salvage work after an injury ended his military career 3 years ago, leaving his right leg more metal than bone. The autumn morning was crisp, the kind that makes your breath visible and reminds you winter's coming whether you're ready or not. His diving gear felt heavier than usual as he climbed onto the salvage barge owned by Ben Ortiz, a gruff but good-hearted scrapyard owner who'd become something of a father figure since Nate arrived in Seabrook 6 months ago. Ben was in his 60s, weathered by 30 years of pulling other people's mistakes out of Oregon waterways, with the kind of dry humor that came from seeing too much human foolishness to take anything too seriously. "Find anything worth keeping down there, Alvarez?" Ben called from the wheelhouse, his face creased with familiar amusement. Nate held up the small device, no bigger than his thumb. "Maybe." This was sealed tight in the bus driver's seat. Ben squinted at it through the morning haze. "Hell, that thing's been underwater since the storm of 04. Whatever's on there is probably soup by now." Nate wasn't so sure. The casing looked military grade, designed to survive worse than 8 years in river silt. He'd seen similar drives during his Navy days, before the helicopter accident in Afghanistan that shattered more than just his leg. It had shattered his sense of purpose, his identity as someone who served something bigger than himself. "You heading back to town?" Nate asked, already knowing the answer. Ben always stopped at Coleman's cafe after a river job, claiming Karen Coleman made the only coffee worth drinking between Portland and the Pacific. "Course I am. You coming, or you planning to swim back?" Nate secured the flash drive in his waterproof gear bag, right next to the emergency flare he'd carried since his Navy days. Old habits die hard, especially when you're trying to rebuild a life from the wreckage of the old one. "Yeah, I'll ride along." The drive into Seabrook took 20 minutes on winding coastal roads lined with Douglas firs and weathered beach houses. The town had maybe 3,000 people on a good day, most making their living from fishing, logging, or cleaning up after Pacific storms. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where secrets were hard to keep, and where tragedies became part of the town's collective memory. Nate had chosen Seabrook specifically because it was small enough to disappear in, but large enough to find work. He rented a 1-bedroom apartment above Murphy's Hardware while building his salvage business. Honest work that let him use his diving skills without having to explain to employers why he walked with a slight limp or why helicopters sometimes made him break out in cold sweats. Coleman's Cafe sat on Harbor Street like it had been there forever, which it probably had. The building embodied old Oregon coastal architecture, weathered cedar shingles, white trim, and windows that looked out on the working harbor where fishing boats bobbed alongside weekend pleasure craft from Portland. A hand-painted sign swayed in the morning breeze. Coleman's, coffee, community, and Karen's famous cinnamon rolls since 1987. The year 1987 would have been when Karen Coleman was young, probably just married and full of dreams about raising a family in this quiet coastal town. Now, 17 years later, those dreams had been shattered by a tragedy that defined not just her life, but the entire community's sense of safety and innocence. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, hitting Nate with the smell of fresh coffee and something baking that reminded his stomach he'd been underwater since 5 in the morning. The interior was quintessential small-town cafe. Mismatched chairs that told stories of decades of use, local artwork depicting seascapes and fishing boats, and the kind of welcoming atmosphere that made strangers feel like regulars after one visit. But what stopped Nate cold were the displays covering nearly every available wall space. Track medals, dozens of them, arranged in shadow boxes with accompanying newspaper clippings and photographs. Gold, silver, bronze, and ribbons in every color imaginable. State championships, regional records, scholarship announcements, all of them bearing the same name, Lydia Coleman. This was a shrine. A mother's refusal to let her daughter's memory fade, even 8 years after her disappearance. "Morning, Ben," called a voice from behind the counter. The usual, Karen Coleman emerged from the kitchen carrying a pot of coffee that smelled like heaven. She was probably in her early 50s, though grief had likely aged her beyond her years. Her graying brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her hands moved with the efficiency of someone who'd been serving coffee for decades, finding comfort in routine when everything else had fallen apart. She wore a faded Seabrook high track and field sweatshirt that had clearly seen better years, and when she smiled at Ben, Nate could see the family resemblance in the photographs covering the walls. The same intelligent eyes, the same determined set to the jaw. But where the photos showed a vibrant teenager full of potential, Karen's face carried the weight of 8 years of unanswered questions. "You know it, Karen. And bring some of those cinnamon rolls if you got 'em fresh." Ben settled into his usual booth by the window, a spot that let him watch the harbor while maintaining his role as the cafe's unofficial greeter and town gossip coordinator. "This here's Nate Alvarez, the diver I told you about. He's the one been cleaning up that bus wreck." Karen's smile faltered slightly when she looked at Nate, her expression shifting through the complex calculations every small-town resident makes when meeting someone new. Neighbor, visitor, or potential problem? Friend or threat? Someone who might help, or someone who might bring more pain? "Mr. Alvarez." Her voice was carefully neutral, polite but guarded. "Ben mentioned you were working on the river cleanup. That wreck's been bothering the environmental folks for years." Nate understood her caution. As the mother of Seabrook's most famous missing person, Karen Coleman probably attracted more than her share of true crime enthusiasts, amateur detectives, and well-meaning strangers who thought they could solve what professional investigators couldn't. 8 years of that attention would make anyone wary of newcomers asking questions. "Yes, ma'am. Should have it cleared by next week." Nate found himself looking around at the medal displays again, trying to process the sheer volume of achievements represented on these walls. These are impressive accomplishments. The transformation in Karen's face was immediate and heartbreaking. Maternal pride overrode wariness, and for a moment, she looked like any other mother showing off her child's achievements. "That's my Lydia. She was going to run track at the University of Oregon. Full scholarship. She was the fastest 17-year-old in the state that year." The past tense hung in the air like coastal fog, heavy and inescapable. Nate knew the basic story. Everyone in Oregon knew about Lydia Coleman's disappearance. It was the kind of tragedy that becomes part of a region's collective consciousness, whispered about at grocery stores, and remembered every time someone drives past Highway 101. But standing here, surrounded by the physical evidence of a young life cut short, the story felt different, more real, more personal. These weren't just newspaper headlines or crime show material. This was a mother's daily reality, a family's ongoing nightmare, a community's open wound that had never healed. "I remember reading about the case," Nate said carefully, aware he was walking into emotional territory that could explode at any moment. "I'm sorry for your loss." Karen's hand stilled on the coffee pot, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ben shifted uncomfortably in his booth, clearly wishing he'd warned Nate about the landmine he'd just stepped on. "She's not dead, Mr. Alvarez." Karen's voice was steady, but Nate could hear the steel underneath. Missing isn't the same as dead, no matter what some people want to believe. The silence that followed was loaded with 8 years of frustration, hope, and the kind of desperate determination that keeps a mother searching long after everyone else has given up. Nate realized he'd stumbled into the heart of Karen Coleman's existence. The daily choice to believe her daughter might still be alive somewhere, waiting to come home. "Of course," Nate said quietly. "I didn't mean to assume." Karen forced a smile and poured his coffee with the careful precision of someone maintaining control through routine. "Cream or sugar? Black's fine." Lydia always drank her coffee black, too. The words came out before Karen could stop them, as if talking about her daughter in present tense was an automatic reflex. Said anything else was for people who didn't really want coffee in the first place. Nate sipped the coffee. It was excellent, and studied the nearest display case while trying to navigate this conversational minefield. The centerpiece photograph showed a teenage girl mid-stride on a track, her face set with the kind of fierce determination you see in serious athletes. She had her mother's eyes and smile, but there was something else there. Intelligence, awareness, the look of someone who noticed things other people missed. Lydia Coleman had been beautiful, but more than that, she'd been alive in a way that jumped out of every photograph. Even frozen in these images, she seemed to radiate the kind of energy that draws people in, that makes them want to be part of whatever adventure she was planning next. "She was beautiful," Nate said. "She was brilliant." Karen wiped down the already clean counter with more force than necessary, her movements sharp with barely contained emotion. People always talk about how fast she was, but Lydia was smart, really smart. She noticed things other people missed, asked questions that made adults uncomfortable. There was pride in her voice, but also something else, a hint that maybe Lydia's intelligence, her habit of asking uncomfortable questions, might have contributed to whatever happened to her. "She was going to study criminology in college," Karen continued, her voice taking on the dreamy quality of someone recounting cherished plans that would never come to pass. "Said she wanted to be a detective, help solve cases that nobody else could figure out." Nate's hand tightened slightly on his coffee cup. A 17-year-old interested in criminology, who asked uncomfortable questions and noticed things others missed, who disappeared without a trace on her way to receive awards that represented years of dedication and achievement. "She was always watching people," Karen said, lost now in memories that seemed simultaneously precious and painful, trying to figure out what made them tick. Used to carry around this little digital recorder. Said she was practicing for when she'd have to interview suspect someday. The flash drive in Nate's gear bag suddenly felt heavier. A recorder? The police found it in her car that night, empty. They said she must have erased whatever was on it before. Karen's voice trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. "Before what?" Nate asked gently. Karen's eyes met his, and for a moment he saw past the protective shell she'd built around herself. Underneath was a mother who'd spent 8 years wondering if her daughter had known she was in danger, if Lydia had tried to leave some kind of message, some clue that might lead to answers. "Before whatever happened to her," Karen said finally. "The police think she might have been scared of something or someone. Why else would she erase her own recording?" Ben cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. "Karen makes the best cinnamon rolls on the coast," he said, clearly trying to change the subject. "You should try one, Nate." But Nate was studying the photographs on the walls with new interest, seeing them not just as a mother's memorial, but as potential evidence. In several pictures, Lydia was surrounded by teammates and coaches, all of them smiling for the camera. But now that he was looking for it, he could see something in Lydia's expression in some of the later photos. A tension around her eyes, a forced quality to her smile. One photograph in particular caught his attention. It showed Lydia receiving a medal from a man in his 40s, distinguished looking, with silver-streaked hair, and the kind of confident smile that suggested someone used to being the center of attention. The plaque beneath the photo identified him as Coach Marcus Harrison, and the caption noted it was taken just 2 weeks before Lydia's disappearance. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "That's Coach Harrison," Karen said, following his gaze. "He built the most successful track program in the state. Half the kids he coached went on to compete in college." Lydia thought the world of him. There was something careful about the way she said it, as if she was reciting words she'd rehearsed many times over the years. Nate wondered how many people had asked Karen about the coach, how many times she'd had to defend a man who might have been the last person to see her daughter alive. "He was very supportive after Lydia disappeared," Karen continued. "Helped organize search parties, offered a reward from his own pocket. The whole team was devastated." Nate nodded, but something about the photograph bothered him. Maybe it was the way Harrison's hand rested on Lydia's shoulder, or the way Lydia seemed to be leaning slightly away from him despite her smile. Or maybe it was just his own suspicious nature, trained by years of military intelligence work to look for things that didn't quite fit. "Did the police question him?" Nate asked. "Of course they did. They questioned everyone who knew her. But Marcus had an alibi. He was at a coaching conference in Seattle that weekend. Dozens of witnesses." Karen's voice carried the weary tone of someone who'd answered these questions countless times. "He was actually giving a presentation when Lydia disappeared." Ben shot Nate a warning look, clearly signaling that this line of questioning was making Karen uncomfortable. But Nate couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important, that the flash drive in his bag might be connected to the empty recorder found in Lydia's car 8 years ago. "I should probably get going," Nate said, finishing his coffee and leaving money on the counter. "Thank you for the coffee, Mrs. Coleman. It was excellent, Karen. And you're welcome here anytime, Mr. Alvarez. It's nice to meet someone new who actually listens when people talk." As they left the cafe, Ben was uncharacteristically quiet until they reached his truck. "You need to be careful, Nate," he said finally. "Karen Coleman's been through enough without someone else coming around asking questions that don't have answers." "I wasn't trying to upset her," Nate said. "But don't you think it's strange? A girl who wanted to be a detective, who carried a recorder everywhere, disappears after erasing whatever she'd been recording?" Ben started the engine and pulled away from the cafe. "What I think is that a 17-year-old girl disappeared 8 years ago, and every amateur detective and true crime fanatic who's rolled through this town since then has had their own theory about what happened." None of them brought her home. They drove in silence for a few minutes before Ben spoke again. "That flash drive you found? You planning to turn it over to the police?" Nate touched his gear bag, feeling the small device through the waterproof fabric. "I should probably see what's on it first. Might just be someone's old homework or vacation photos." But even as he said it, Nate knew he didn't believe that. Something about the careful way the drive had been hidden, the military-grade casing, the location in a school bus that had been underwater since 2004, the same year Lydia Coleman disappeared. Ben dropped him off at his apartment above Murphy's Hardware, and Nate climbed the narrow stairs to his modest living space. The apartment was spartanly furnished: a couch, a small dining table, a bed, and not much else. He'd learned to live light after the accident, to not get too attached to places or things that might not be permanent. But sitting at his kitchen table with his laptop and the waterproof flash drive, Nate felt something he hadn't experienced in years: the electric anticipation of a mystery about to unfold. It was the same feeling he'd had during intelligence briefings in the Navy, when pieces of information that seemed unrelated suddenly began forming a pattern. He plugged the drive into his laptop and waited for it to load. The device was definitely military grade. It came to life immediately, despite its 8 years underwater, displaying a directory of files with names that made his heart race. Voice diary, entry 001. Voice diary, entry 002. Voice diary, entry 047. GPS log data, March 2004. GPS log data, April 2004. Urgent. Listen to this. First, Nate stared at the screen, realizing that the empty recorder found in Lydia Coleman's car might not have been empty because she'd erased it in fear. It might have been empty because she'd transferred everything to a backup device, this device, and hidden it where she thought someone would eventually find it. His hand hovered over the mouse, knowing that once he clicked on that first file, there would be no going back. Whatever was on this drive had been important enough for a 17-year-old girl to risk hiding it. Important enough that it might have cost her everything. The afternoon sun slanted through his apartment windows, casting long shadows across the small room. Somewhere out there, Karen Coleman was serving coffee to locals and tourists, surrounded by her daughter's medals and photographs, still believing that someday she might get answers. Maybe today was that day. Nate double-clicked on the file marked "Urgent." Listened to this first, and heard a voice he recognized from the family resemblance, young and scared but determined. "If you're hearing this, something happened to me. My name is Lydia Coleman, and I think my coach is going to kill me." Nate's hands trembled slightly as Lydia Coleman's voice filled his small apartment. Even through 8 years of water damage and digital compression, her fear was unmistakable. The voice belonged to someone who knew she was running out of time. "If you're hearing this, something happened to me. My name is Lydia Coleman, and I think my coach is going to kill me." The recording continued, and Nate found himself leaning closer to his laptop speakers, straining to catch every word. Lydia's voice was steady despite the fear underneath, as if she was forcing herself to stay calm while documenting what might be her final testimony. "I've been keeping these voice diaries for 3 months now, ever since Coach Harrison started acting different around me. At first, I thought I was imagining things. He's always been supportive, pushing me to be faster, to train harder. But something changed after I broke the state record in the 1,500 meters. Nate opened a new file labeled Voice Diary, Entry 001, and heard a younger, more confident version of Lydia's voice from what the timestamp indicated was January 15th, 2004. "Coach says I have Olympic potential. He wants me to start training with a special group of athletes from around the region. Elite coaching, he calls it. Says there are opportunities for someone with my times that go way beyond college scholarships." The early entries painted a picture of a dedicated athlete, excited about her future. Lydia talked about intensive training sessions, special nutritional supplements, and weekend trips to work with other promising runners from Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. She spoke about Coach Harrison with respect and admiration, grateful for the attention and opportunities he was providing. But as Nate progressed through the files, following the chronological timestamps, he could hear the gradual shift in Lydia's tone. By February, there were hints of confusion and discomfort. Voice Diary, Entry 012, February 8th, 2004. "Something weird happened at today's special training session. There were only 3 of us there. Me, Sarah from Portland, and Marcus from Spokane. Coach Harrison had us take these vitamins he said would help with our endurance. But they made me feel strange, dizzy, and sort of disconnected. Sarah seemed really out of it too, and when I tried to ask her about it later, she acted like she didn't remember much about the session at all." March entries revealed escalating concerns. Lydia mentioned athletes who had participated in the special training program suddenly transferring schools or moving away with their families. She tried to contact some of them, but found their old phone numbers disconnected, their social media accounts deleted. Voice Diary, Entry 028, March 15th, 2004. "I can't find Jennifer Wilson anywhere. She was at the special training 2 weeks ago, and now her parents say she's transferred to a private school in California for better opportunities. But when I asked Coach Harrison about it, he got angry and told me to focus on my own training instead of worrying about other people's decisions." Nate felt a chill run down his spine. He opened the GPS log files and found detailed location data that corresponded with the voice diary entries. The coordinates showed trips to remote locations throughout the Cascade Mountains, far from any legitimate training facilities. Some sessions lasted entire weekends, in areas where cell phone coverage would be spotty at best. The voice diaries from April painted an increasingly frightening picture. Lydia had started connecting patterns that suggested something far more sinister than irregular training methods. Voice diary, entry 041, April 10th, 2004. I followed Coach Harrison after practice today. I know I shouldn't have, but I needed to understand what's really going on. He met with two men I'd never seen before at that warehouse near the docks. They handed him an envelope. I couldn't see what was in it, but the way they acted, it looked like money. Lots of money. One of the men had a van with out-of-state plates. California, I think. As they were leaving, I heard Coach Harrison say something about the next shipment and 3 more this month. I don't know what he meant, but it made my stomach turn. Nate paused the recording and stared at his laptop screen. The implications were staggering. If Lydia's suspicions were correct, Coach Harrison wasn't just training elite athletes. He was involved in some kind of trafficking operation, using his position of trust to identify and recruit victims. The later entries confirmed Lydia's growing certainty that she was in danger. Her voice became more urgent, more frightened, but also more determined to document everything she'd discovered. Voice diary, entry 045, April 18th, 2004. I found Sarah Mitchell's missing person report online. Her family in Portland filed it 3 weeks ago. She's been missing since our last special training session. The police think she ran away. But I know better. Sarah wouldn't run away. She was planning to propose to her girlfriend after graduation. I'm scared, but I have to keep recording this. If something happens to me, someone needs to know the truth. Coach Harrison isn't who everyone thinks he is. He's taking kids, selling them. Somehow, the special training sessions are just a way to drug us and see how we react, to test whether we'll be compliant. The GPS data supported her fears. The coordinates for the final training sessions led to increasingly remote locations, some near the Canadian border, where crossing illegally would be relatively easy for someone who knew the terrain. Voice diary, entry 047, April 22nd, 2004. This is probably my last entry. Coach Harrison told me today that I've been selected for a very special opportunity, a private training facility in Canada, where Olympic-level athletes work with the best coaches in North America. He says I'd leave right after the awards banquet tomorrow night. Lydia's voice was barely above a whisper now, as if she was afraid someone might overhear even her private recordings. But I know it's not a training facility. I've seen the pattern now. Kids go to these opportunities, and they disappear. New identities, new lives, cut off from their families forever. Or worse. I'm going to the awards banquet tomorrow because if I don't show up, he'll know I suspect something. But I'm going to tell everyone what I've discovered. The parents, the other coaches, maybe even some reporters, if any are there. I can't let him take any more kids. I've hidden this flash drive where someone will eventually find it. If you're hearing this, please find Detective Rodriguez at the Seabrook Police Department. Tell her about the GPS coordinates, about the missing athletes, about the warehouse meetings. Make them understand that this isn't just about me. The final recording was timestamped April 23rd, 2004, the day Lydia disappeared. Voice diary, final entry. Something's wrong. Coach Harrison just called and said there's been a change of plans. Instead of meeting at the school for the banquet, he wants to pick me up at home. Says there's something important he needs to discuss with me privately first. Lydia's breathing was audible now, rapid and shallow. I think he knows. Somehow he figured out that I've been watching him, recording everything. Mom's not home from the cafe yet, and I don't know who else to call. The police won't believe me without proof, and all my proof is on this drive. If I don't make it to the banquet tonight, if my car is found empty somewhere, please know that I didn't run away. Know that Coach Marcus Harrison killed me to protect his operation. And please, please find the other missing kids before it's too late. The recording ended with the sound of a car pulling into a driveway, and Lydia's whispered, "He's here." Nate sat in stunned silence, staring at his laptop screen. The timestamp showed that final entry was made at 6:47 p.m. on April 23, 2004. According to the police reports he'd read online, Lydia's car was found abandoned on Highway 101 at approximately 8:30 p.m. that same evening, which meant that whatever happened to Lydia Coleman occurred during the nearly 2 hours between her final recording and the discovery of her empty car. Nate's military training kicked in, analyzing the intelligence he'd just gathered. Lydia hadn't just stumbled onto a single predator. She'd uncovered what appeared to be an organized trafficking network using youth athletics as a recruiting ground. Coach Harrison was clearly involved, but the operation was bigger than one man could manage alone. The GPS coordinates, the out-of-state connections, the systematic targeting of elite young athletes from different regions. This had the hallmarks of a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had probably been operating for years before Lydia discovered it. And if it had been running for 8 years since her disappearance, how many other young athletes had vanished into this network? How many families were still searching for children who'd been promised Olympic dreams, but instead found nightmares? Nate's hands shook as he reached for his phone. Detective Rodriguez was probably long retired or transferred, but the Seabrook Police Department would need to hear these recordings immediately. This wasn't just a cold case anymore. It was an active investigation into an ongoing criminal conspiracy. But as he started to dial, his apartment's front window exploded inward in a shower of glass and splintered wood. A voice from outside shouted instructions that made Nate's blood freeze. "Check his computer. Find that drive." Nate grabbed his laptop and the flash drive, diving behind his kitchen counter as footsteps pounded up the stairs to his apartment. His military instinct screamed warnings. Someone had been watching him, waiting for him to discover Lydia's recordings, which meant the network was still active, still protecting itself, still eliminating threats. And Nate Alvarez had just become their newest target. Nate rolled behind his kitchen counter as heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs to his apartment. His laptop clutched against his chest, the flash drive secured in his pocket. He could hear at least 3 distinct voices coordinating their search. "Kitchen's clear. Check the bedroom. Where's his computer?" These weren't local thugs or random burglars. The voices were calm, professional, methodical, military or law enforcement training. Nate realized with growing dread the same kind of coordinated precision he'd used during Navy operations. His apartment's back window faced an alley with a fire escape, a detail he'd noted when he first rented the place. Old habits from his military days of always knowing the exits. Keeping low, Nate crawled across the broken glass toward his escape route, while the intruders systematically searched his belongings. He's not here, but his gear bag's still warm. Wetsuit's damp. He can't have gone far. Nate slipped out the back window and down the fire escape, grateful for the fog that provided cover in the alley. His truck was parked on Harbor Street, but approaching it would mean walking directly past his apartment's front entrance. Instead, he made his way through the maze of back alleys that connected Seabrook's old downtown, heading for the one place he knew he could find help. Ben Ortiz's scrapyard sat on 5 acres of organized chaos at the edge of town, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. More importantly, Ben lived in a mobile home on the property and had mentioned more than once that he didn't trust banks, cops, or anyone else who asked too many questions about other people's business. The walk took 20 minutes through residential streets, where porch lights were beginning to flicker on in the gathering dusk. Nate kept to the shadows, constantly checking over his shoulder for signs of pursuit. His military training had taught him surveillance detection, but it had been years since he'd needed those skills for anything more serious than avoiding aggressive bill collectors. Ben answered his front door, holding a shotgun with the casual familiarity of someone who'd been expecting trouble for decades. "Well, hell, Nate, you look like you've seen a ghost." Ben stepped aside to let him enter, but kept the shotgun within easy reach. Or maybe something worse than a ghost. "Someone just broke into my apartment looking for this." Nate held up the flash drive. "I think it's connected to the Lydia Coleman case." Ben's weathered face darkened. "Sit down and tell me what you found." Over the next hour, Nate played selected portions of Lydia's recordings, while Ben listened with the grim attention of someone who'd seen enough of human nature to believe the worst was always possible. When the audio ended, Ben was quiet for a long moment. "That son of a bitch," he said finally. "Marcus Harrison coached my nephew Tommy back in '98. Always thought there was something off about him, the way he paid special attention to certain kids. Did Tommy ever mention anything unusual?" Tommy wasn't the type Harrison was interested in. Good kid, decent runner, but not elite material. Ben's expression was grim, but there was this girl, Rebecca Santos, hell of a sprinter. Harrison took her under his wing, talked about special training opportunities. She disappeared the summer before her senior year. Family said she'd gone to live with relatives in Mexico, but it never made sense. Rebecca was valedictorian material, had scholarship offers from 3 universities. Nate felt the familiar chill of connecting dots in an intelligence puzzle. What year was this? Summer of 2001. 3 years before your Lydia girl. The pattern was becoming clear. Harrison had been operating for at least 7 years before Lydia caught on to his activities. How many other young athletes had disappeared during that time? Their families told convenient stories about transfers or family relocations. "I need to contact the police," Nate said, "but I don't know who to trust. If this network is as sophisticated as Lydia suspected, they might have people in law enforcement." Ben nodded grimly. "There's a detective in the county sheriff's department, Marisol Vega. She's clean. I'd stake my life on it. Mexican-American woman. Been fighting corruption in law enforcement since she was old enough to carry a badge. If anyone can handle this without tipping off the wrong people, it's her. Can you reach her?" "I can try. But first, you need to understand something." Ben's expression was serious. "If what that girl recorded is true, if there's really a trafficking network operating out of our community, then you just painted a target on your back, the size of Oregon. These people killed a 17-year-old girl to protect their operation. They won't hesitate to kill a washed-up Navy diver." The truth of that statement settled over Nate like a lead blanket. He'd stumbled into something far bigger and more dangerous than a simple missing person case. But turning back wasn't an option. Not after hearing Lydia's voice. Not after understanding that other kids might still be trapped in whatever system Harrison had created. "Make the call," Nate said. Detective Marisol Vega arrived at Ben's scrapyard 40 minutes later, driving an unmarked sedan and moving with the cautious alertness of someone who'd learned not to take anything at face value. She was probably in her early 40s, with intelligent dark eyes, and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she'd earned her position through competence rather than politics. "Mr. Ortiz tells me you've found something related to the Coleman disappearance," she said without preamble. "I should warn you, I've heard a lot of theories about that case over the years. Most of them have been wishful thinking from people who want to help, but don't understand the realities of police work." Nate handed her a pair of earbuds connected to his laptop. "Listen to this. Then tell me if you think it's wishful thinking." Vega's expression changed dramatically as she progressed through Lydia's recordings. Her initial skepticism gave way to focused attention, then to the kind of controlled anger that comes from realizing you've been investigating the wrong crime for 8 years. "Jesus Christ," she whispered after the final entry. "This isn't a missing person case, it's human trafficking." "There's more," Nate said, opening the GPS log files. "Coordinates for every location Lydia mentioned, plus financial data she somehow accessed. Dates, times, even some license plate numbers." Vega studied the data with the intensity of someone seeing a cold case transform into an active investigation. "Some of these coordinates are in my jurisdiction. I can get search warrants, start checking these locations for evidence." "What about Coach Harrison?" "That's more complicated. Harrison's got a sterling reputation in this community, connections throughout the state athletics program. If we move against him without overwhelming evidence, he'll lawyer up and disappear before we can build a solid case." Vega's frustration was evident. Plus, if Lydia was right about this being a network operation, arresting Harrison might just alert his partners to shut down and relocate. Ben spoke up from across the room. "What about the other missing kids? The ones Lydia mentioned in her recordings?" "That's where we start," Vega said. "Missing persons reports from multiple jurisdictions, Patterns of elite athletes disappearing around the same time frames as Harrison's special training sessions. If we can establish a clear pattern, connect Harrison to multiple disappearances across state lines, then we're looking at federal crimes. FBI jurisdiction. She paused, looking directly at Nate. But I need to know. Are you committed to seeing this through? Because once we start pulling at these threads, there's no going back. If this network is as organized as Lydia suspected, they've already demonstrated they're willing to kill to protect themselves. Nate thought about the voice recordings, about a 17-year-old girl who'd been brave enough to document her own impending murder in hopes that someone would eventually find the truth, about Rebecca Santos and Sarah Mitchell, and however many other young people had vanished into this system over the years. I'm committed, he said. Good, because I'm going to need your help to do this right. Vega began packing up the laptop and drive. First step is finding Lydia's best friend, someone she would have confided in, shared her suspicions with. Teenage girls don't keep secrets like this completely to themselves. How do we find her? High school yearbooks, social media archives, maybe some of the older teachers who remember that class. Vega stood, already shifting into investigative mode. What was the friend's name mentioned in the recordings? Nate scrolled back through his notes. Jamie. Lydia mentioned Jamie a few times, always in the context of someone she trusted. Jamie's a good start. We'll also need to contact other families, other police departments. This is going to be a multi-jurisdictional investigation if we do it right. As if summoned by their conversation, Nate's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We know you have something that belongs to us. Return it quietly, and no one gets hurt. Persist in this foolishness, and you'll join the Coleman girl. Vega read the message over his shoulder. Well, that confirms they're still active and monitoring our communications. She pulled out her own phone. I'm calling for backup. We need to get you somewhere safe while we figure out our next moves. What about Ben? Ben's been taking care of himself in this town longer than either of us have been alive, the older man said with a dry chuckle. Plus, I got security cameras, motion sensors, and enough firepower to discourage most uninvited guests. You worry about staying alive long enough to get that girl some justice. Over the next 3 hours, Detective Vega transformed Ben's mobile home into an impromptu command center. She contacted colleagues in Washington and California, requesting files on missing athletes dating back to 2001. She reached out to retired Detective Rodriguez, who confirmed that the original investigation into Lydia's disappearance had been frustrated by Coach Harrison's solid alibi and lack of physical evidence. Rodriguez always suspected there was more to the story, Vega explained. But without evidence, without witnesses, there was nowhere to go with the case. Harrison's coaching conference alibi was airtight. Dozens of witnesses, hotel records, even video from the conference presentations, which means he had help, Nate realized. Someone else took Lydia while Harrison established his alibi. Exactly. A network with enough sophistication to coordinate alibis and eliminate evidence. Vega's expression was grim. We're not just dealing with a lone predator. This is organized crime. The breakthrough came when one of Vega's contacts in Portland located Jamie Tran, now 25, and working as a cybersecurity analyst for a tech company. More importantly, Jamie had been Lydia's teammate on the 4x400 relay team and had maintained detailed digital records of their communications. Jamie agreed to meet with us tomorrow, Vega announced. She's driving down from Portland with what she called Lydia's backup files. Apparently, our missing girl was more paranoid than we realized. She kept copies of everything on multiple platforms, including the voice recordings. Jamie wouldn't say over the phone, but she hinted that Lydia had been sharing information with her for months before the disappearance. Real-time backups of everything she was discovering about Harrison's operation. Nate felt a surge of hope. If Lydia had been systematically documenting the trafficking network, sharing evidence with a trusted friend, then they might have enough information to not just solve her disappearance, but to bring down the entire operation. His phone buzzed again with another text. Last warning. Return what you stole or face the consequences. This time, Vega didn't seem concerned. Let them make threats. Tomorrow we'll have enough evidence to start making arrests. And once we have Harrison in custody, the rest of his network will start unraveling. But even as she spoke with confidence, Nate could see the worry in her eyes. They were moving into dangerous territory, challenging people who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill. The next 24 hours would determine whether they could expose the truth before the network silenced them permanently. Outside Ben's mobile home, fog was rolling in from the Pacific, shrouding the scrapyard in gray silence. Somewhere in that darkness, people were watching and planning, calculating their next move in a game where the stakes were measured in human lives. Nate checked his phone one more time, then powered it off completely. Tomorrow would bring answers, but tonight was about survival. Jamie Tran arrived at Ben's scrapyard the next morning, driving a modified Honda Civic with enough electronic equipment visible through the windows to stock a surveillance operation. She was petite, probably no more than 5'2", with short black hair and the kind of intense focus that comes from spending 12 hours a day working with computer code. But when she looked at Detective Vega and Nate, her eyes held the same haunted quality they'd heard in Lydia's final recordings. "I've been waiting 8 years for someone to take this seriously," Jamie said without preamble, pulling a reinforced laptop case from her car. Lydia didn't just suspect Coach Harrison was dirty. She proved it. Over the next 2 hours, Jamie systematically laid out evidence that transformed their understanding of the trafficking network's scope and sophistication. The encrypted chat logs between her and Lydia revealed a months-long investigation that went far beyond what they'd heard in the voice recordings. Lydia was brilliant at pattern recognition, Jamie explained, opening files that showed financial transactions, travel records, and communication intercepts. She realized that Harrison wasn't operating alone when she started tracking the money flow through the Pacific Northwest Youth Athletics Foundation. The foundation appeared legitimate on the surface, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing advanced training opportunities for promising young athletes. But Lydia's research had uncovered a web of shell companies, suspicious cash transfers, and travel expenses that made no sense for a regional sports program. "Look at this," Jamie said, highlighting a series of transactions from March 2004. The foundation received a $50,000 donation from something called Mountain Peak Enterprises, a company that doesn't seem to exist anywhere except on paper. That same week, they paid for training camp transportation to facilities that aren't listed in any legitimate athletic directories. Detective Vega studied the financial records with growing amazement. How did a 17-year-old get access to this kind of information? Lydia's mom did the foundation's bookkeeping as a side job from the cafe, Jamie explained. Karen thought she was helping support youth athletics in the community. She had no idea the books she was maintaining documented a criminal enterprise. The realization hit Nate like a physical blow. Karen Coleman had unknowingly been maintaining financial records for the network that killed her daughter. The cruel irony was staggering. "There's more," Jamie continued, opening another set of files. Lydia identified at least 12 other missing athletes across Oregon, Washington, and Northern California between 2001 and 2004. All of them were recruited for special training opportunities through programs connected to the foundation. She displayed a map showing the locations and dates of disappearances. The pattern was chilling in its systematic nature. 2 or 3 athletes per year, selected from different schools and regions to avoid attracting attention from any single community. Each victim fit a specific profile, Jamie explained. Elite performance levels, family situations that made them vulnerable, single parents, financial struggles, limited family connections that might generate sustained searches. "What about their families?" Vega asked. 12 missing kids should have generated major investigations. "That's the brilliance of the operation," Jamie said grimly. The families weren't told their children were missing. They were told their kids had been selected for exclusive training programs, sometimes even fake scholarship opportunities. Parents would get official-looking letters explaining that their child was being transferred to specialized facilities for accelerated development. She opened a folder containing several document templates. Lydia found these on Harrison's computer during one of her surveillance operations. Fake letterheads from colleges, Olympic training centers, even international exchange programs. Parents thought their children were living their dreams, not being trafficked. The sophistication was overwhelming. This wasn't a simple predator targeting vulnerable kids. It was a carefully orchestrated system designed to exploit the trust and ambitions of families desperate to help their children succeed. When did the families realize something was wrong? Nate asked. Most of them didn't. Not for months or even years, Jamie said. The network maintained contact through fake social media accounts, occasional phone calls using voice modulators, even photoshopped pictures of the kids at supposed training facilities. By the time families became suspicious, the trail was completely cold. Detective Vega was taking detailed notes, her expression reflecting the professional excitement of a law enforcement officer seeing a major case break open. This is enough evidence to involve the FBI. Human trafficking across state lines, mail fraud, conspiracy charges that could bring down the entire network. There's something else, Jamie said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Lydia discovered where some of the missing athletes ended up. She opened a file that made everyone in the room fall silent. It contained photographs, documents, and what appeared to be intercepted communications detailing the final destinations of trafficked athletes. Some were sold to private collectors, wealthy individuals who wanted young, fit companions who couldn't escape or contact authorities. Others were forced into underground athletic competitions where wealthy spectators bet on outcomes. The most attractive ones, Jamie's voice trailed off, were sold into sexual slavery, Vega finished grimly. Jamie nodded. Lydia found evidence that the network had international connections. Kids were being shipped to buyers in Asia, Eastern Europe, even some Middle Eastern countries where they'd disappear completely into systems designed to erase their previous identities. The room fell silent as the full scope of the horror became clear. This wasn't just about missing persons or even domestic trafficking. It was an international criminal enterprise that had been operating for years, using America's youth athletics programs as a recruitment ground for global human trafficking. How many total victims are we talking about? Nate asked. Jamie's answer was barely audible. Based on the Foundation's financial records and the travel documentation Lydia compiled, probably at least 40 kids over the past decade. Maybe more, 40 young lives destroyed. 40 families living with lies and false hope. 40 futures stolen by people who were supposed to be mentors and protectors. We need federal resources, Vega said, reaching for her phone. This is beyond anything local law enforcement can handle. But before she could dial, her phone rang with an incoming call from an unknown number. She answered cautiously. Detective Vega? This is Dr. Aisha Malik with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. I understand you've uncovered evidence related to missing athletes in the Pacific Northwest. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Vega looked at the others with alarm before responding. How did you know about our investigation? Because we've been tracking similar patterns across multiple states for the past 2 years, Dr. Malik replied. Your inquiry yesterday about missing athletes triggered alerts in our database. We've been hoping someone would connect the dots at the local level. Within an hour, Dr. Malik arrived at Ben's scrapyard with 2 other federal agents and a mobile command unit that transformed the modest trailer park into the center of a major federal investigation. Dr. Malik was a calm, methodical woman in her 40s who radiated the kind of professional competence that comes from years of studying the worst aspects of human behavior. What you've discovered represents the most significant break in a case we've been building for 24 months, she explained to the assembled group. We've identified similar trafficking networks operating in Texas, Florida, and the Midwest, all using youth athletics as recruiting grounds. She displayed a national map showing known and suspected trafficking routes. The Pacific Northwest network appeared to be one of several regional operations, feeding into a larger international system. The good news is that we now have enough evidence to begin dismantling the entire network, Dr. Malik continued. The bad news is that once we start making arrests, these organizations typically respond, by eliminating evidence and witnesses, meaning they'll try to kill anyone who can testify against them, Ben said bluntly. That's a distinct possibility, Dr. Malik confirmed, which is why we need to move quickly and coordinate simultaneous operations across multiple jurisdictions. Over the next several hours, the investigation expanded exponentially. FBI teams began tracking financial records through the banking system, identifying properties owned by shell companies connected to the foundation. Agents in other states started locating families who'd been deceived about their children's whereabouts, building a database of victims and evidence that stretched back over a decade. The breakthrough came when Dr. Malik's team cracked the encryption on communications they'd intercepted between regional network coordinators. The messages revealed that Coach Harrison was scheduled to attend a recruitment conference the following weekend at a remote resort in the Cascade Mountains. It's not a coaching conference, Dr. Malik explained. Based on the communications patterns and location, it appears to be a periodic gathering where network coordinators showcase available inventory to potential buyers. The clinical language couldn't disguise the horrific reality. Teenage athletes being displayed and sold like livestock to the highest bidders. How many kids will be there? Jamie asked. Based on recent acquisitions and transportation logistics, probably between 8 and 12 current victims, Dr. Malik replied. All of them abducted within the past 6 months from athletics programs across the western United States. Nate felt a surge of anger and determination. Somewhere in those mountains, young people who should have been celebrating athletic achievements and planning for college were instead being prepared for sale to human predators. What's the plan? He asked. Coordinated raids across multiple locations, Dr. Malik explained. We hit the conference facility, Harrison's home and office, the foundation's headquarters, and several properties we've identified as staging areas. The goal is to rescue current victims while simultaneously arresting the entire network leadership. What about the international connections? Vega asked. Interpol is coordinating with law enforcement in countries where we've traced trafficking destinations. If we can map the complete network, we might be able to rescue victims who were trafficked years ago. As the federal agents continued planning their operations, Nate found himself thinking about Lydia Coleman's final recording. She'd known she was going to die, but she'd faced that reality with courage because she understood that her evidence might save other kids from the same fate. Now, 8 years later, her courage was finally going to make a difference. The network that had killed her was about to be exposed and destroyed, and the victims they'd enslaved were about to be freed. But first, they had to survive the next 48 hours. Because once the raids began, anyone connected to the investigation would become a target for elimination. Jamie was already packing her equipment, preparing to relocate to FBI protective custody. Ben was checking his security systems and loading his weapons. Detective Vega was coordinating with state and local law enforcement to ensure the raids wouldn't be compromised by network infiltrators. And Nate was studying the GPS coordinates for the mountain resort, knowing that somewhere in those remote buildings, kids who reminded him of Lydia Coleman were waiting for rescue. The next 2 days would determine whether justice would finally be served, or whether the network's pattern of violence and corruption would claim more victims. Outside, fog was lifting from the Pacific, revealing a clear morning that seemed to promise hope. But Nate knew that clarity could be deceptive, and that the most dangerous phase of their investigation was just beginning. The raid on Coach Marcus Harrison's home at dawn revealed a truth that shattered every assumption they'd made about the trafficking network. FBI agents, led by Dr. Malik, found Harrison's hidden office in his basement, a room that looked more like a military command center than a coach's workspace. The walls were covered with organizational charts, photographs, and communication logs that mapped a criminal enterprise spanning the entire North American continent. But what stopped everyone cold was the document pinned to the center of the main bulletin board, a corporate hierarchy showing Harrison's position as Regional Coordinator, Pacific Northwest Division. Jesus Christ, Detective Vega whispered, studying the chart. He's not the leader. He's middle management. Dr. Malik was photographing documents with the focused intensity of someone recognizing that their entire investigation had just expanded exponentially. Look at these regional divisions: Southwest, Midwest, Atlantic Coast, Southeast, Texas Gulf, Canadian Maritime. We're looking at a continental operation with dozens of coordinators like Harrison. Nate found himself staring at a photograph showing Harrison with several other men in expensive suits, all of them smiling at what appeared to be some kind of business conference. The caption beneath read, "Annual Coordination Meeting, Vancouver 2003. These weren't desperate criminals operating in shadows. They were businessmen running trafficking like a legitimate corporation. "There's more," Dr. Malik called from across the room, standing in front of a locked filing cabinet they'd just opened. Financial records showing payments to university athletic departments, professional sports organizations, even Olympic training facilities. The documents Dr. Malik had discovered painted a picture of corruption that reached into the highest levels of competitive athletics. College recruiters were being paid to identify vulnerable athletes who could be diverted from legitimate opportunities into trafficking pipelines. Professional sports scouts were providing intelligence on young athletes who might be suitable for alternative career paths. Most chilling were the Olympic training facility connections. Young athletes who thought they were being selected for elite development programs were actually being evaluated for trafficking potential. Their physical and psychological profiles assessed by people who saw them as commodities rather than human beings. This explains how they maintained such sophisticated operations, Dr. Malik said, reviewing the organizational documents. They weren't just criminal predators. They had legitimate athletic industry connections providing cover and resources. Jamie, who had been scanning through computer files they'd seized from Harrison's system, looked up with a horrified expression. There's something else. Something that changes everything about Lydia's case. She pointed to a communication dated April 20th, 2004, 3 days before Lydia's disappearance. It was an encrypted message from someone identified only as Control to Harrison and several other regional coordinators. Immediate operational security alert. Coleman's subject has compromised regional activities through unauthorized surveillance. Full exposure imminent. Initiate Protocol 7 immediately. Protocol 7, Dr. Malik repeated, searching through other documents. What is Protocol 7? Jamie found the answer in Harrison's operational manual, a bound document that read like a military field guide for human trafficking. Protocol 7 was listed under Security Measures, Witness Elimination. It's not just assassination, Jamie read aloud. It's systematic elimination of all evidence and witnesses associated with a compromised operation. When Protocol 7 is activated, they don't just kill the primary threat. They eliminate everyone who might have been exposed to operational details. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Lydia hadn't just been murdered to silence her. She'd been the catalyst for a systematic elimination of evidence that might have included other athletes, coaches, even family members who'd asked too many questions. Look at this, Dr. Malik said, pointing to a list attached to the Protocol 7 documentation. It contained names of 17 people marked for elimination in April 2004, including Lydia Coleman, her mother Karen, Jamie Tran, and 3 other athletes who'd been part of Harrison's special training program. They were going to kill everyone, Nate said, feeling sick. Not just Lydia, but anyone who might have known what she'd discovered. What stopped them? Detective Vega asked. Dr. Malik found the answer in a follow-up communication dated April 24th, 2004, the day after Lydia's disappearance. Operation suspended due to unexpected law enforcement response. Coleman elimination achieved, but secondary targets compromised by police investigation. Recommend operational relocation and evidence destruction. The massive search effort that Seabrook had organized for Lydia had inadvertently saved the lives of everyone else on the elimination list. The network had been forced to abort their cleanup operation and relocate, rather than risk exposing themselves through additional murders. But if they relocated 8 years ago, Jamie asked. "Why are they still operating in this region?" Dr. Malik was studying financial records that provided the disturbing answer. Because they never really left. Look at its property acquisitions and shell company formations. They just went deeper underground, became more sophisticated. The documents showed that after Lydia's death, the network had evolved from a regional trafficking operation into something far more complex. They'd established legitimate businesses that provided perfect cover for their activities. Sports equipment companies, athletic training facilities, youth development foundations. They learned from their mistakes, Dr. Malik explained. Instead of operating as obviously criminal enterprise, they embedded themselves into the legitimate athletic industry. Now they have direct access to youth athletics programs across the entire continent. Harrison's files revealed the scope of this evolution. The Pacific Northwest Regional Youth Athletics Foundation had expanded into a network of interconnected organizations spanning multiple countries. Canadian Sports Development Initiative, Mexican Athletic Excellence Program, Northern California Performance Centers, all of them controlled by the same criminal network that had killed Lydia Coleman. The recruitment conference this weekend, Nate realized, it's not just about selling the kids they've already trafficked. It's a business meeting for expanding operations. Exactly, Dr. Malik confirmed, studying intelligence reports about the mountain resort gathering. Based on these communications, they're planning to triple their operational capacity over the next 2 years. Instead of 40 victims per decade, they're targeting over 100 per year. The documents included detailed market analysis for trafficking destinations, pricing structures for different types of victims, and expansion plans for recruiting from high school and college athletics programs across North America. It was human trafficking as corporate enterprise, complete with business plans and profit projections. "There's something else," Jamie said quietly, her voice barely audible as she stared at Harrison's computer screen. "Something that changes everything we thought we knew about Lydia's final days." She turned the laptop around so the others could see what she'd discovered. It was an email dated April 22nd, 2004, the day before Lydia disappeared, sent from Harrison's account to someone identified as Operations Director. Subject has initiated contact with international authorities. Coleman girl accessed restricted communication channels and transmitted evidence packages to Interpol contact in Vancouver. Immediate intervention required before full exposure. The room went silent. Dr. Malik leaned forward, reading the message twice before speaking. Lydia wasn't just investigating locally. She'd made contact with international law enforcement. "How?" Detective Vega asked. "How would a 17-year-old in Oregon even know how to contact Interpol?" Jamie was scrolling through more files, her expression growing more amazed by the minute. Because she wasn't just a smart teenager with suspicions. Look at this. She'd found Harrison's complete intelligence file on Lydia Coleman, and it painted a picture that none of them had imagined. Lydia's interest in criminology hadn't been a casual career aspiration. She'd been participating in an online internship program with the International Criminal Police Organization, working as a volunteer researcher on human trafficking cases. She was already working with international investigators when she stumbled onto Harrison's operation, Jamie explained, reading through the detailed background reports. The Interpol contact wasn't someone she found after discovering the trafficking network. It was someone she'd been working with for months on other cases. Dr. Malik was studying communication logs that showed the true scope of Lydia's final investigation. She didn't just document Harrison's activities. She cross-referenced his operation with similar patterns in other countries, identified international connections, even helped track money flows through offshore banking systems. The revelation was staggering. They'd been thinking of Lydia as a brave teenager who'd accidentally discovered a local trafficking operation. In reality, she'd been an active participant in international law enforcement efforts, who'd recognized that her coach was connected to networks she was already helping to investigate. That's why Protocol 7 was activated, Nate realized. She wasn't just a local threat. She had direct communication with international authorities who were already building cases against trafficking networks. And that's why they couldn't just relocate after killing her, Detective Vega added. They had to completely restructure their entire operation because she'd exposed their methods to law enforcement agencies across multiple countries. Jamie found the final piece of the puzzle in Harrison's encrypted personal files. A communication from the mysterious Control, dated 3 days after Lydia's death, outlined the network's response to her investigation. Global operations suspended pending security review. All regional coordinators to implement new protocols. Previous operational methods compromised by Coleman intelligence package. Estimated recovery time, 24 months minimum. She set them back 2 years, Dr. Malik said with something approaching admiration. A 17-year-old girl single-handedly disrupted an international trafficking network for almost 2 years. But the files revealed something even more significant. Harrison's records showed that the network had never fully recovered from Lydia's investigation. The international attention she generated had forced them to abandon established routes and methods, significantly reducing their operational capacity. Look at these victim numbers, Jamie said, displaying charts that compared pre- and post-2004 trafficking statistics. Before Lydia's investigation, they were trafficking approximately 60 kids per year across all regional divisions. After 2004, those numbers dropped to maybe 20 per year. She saved lives, Nate said quietly. Even after they killed her, her investigation continued to protect other kids. The files also revealed why the network was so determined to expand operations now. 8 years of reduced capacity had cost them millions in revenue and market share to competing trafficking organizations. The upcoming recruitment conference wasn't just about business as usual. It was about rebuilding their operation to pre-2004 levels. They're trying to undo everything Lydia accomplished, Dr. Malik said, studying expansion plans that called for aggressive recruitment from youth athletics programs across North America. This weekend's conference is their attempt to announce that they're back to full operational capacity. But Harrison's files contained one more surprise that changed their understanding of the current situation. Hidden in his financial records was evidence that several legitimate athletic organizations had been infiltrated, not just by individual corrupt officials, but by network operatives placed in key positions specifically to facilitate trafficking operations. USA Track and Field, Canadian Athletics Federation, NCAA Division I recruiting coordinators. Jamie read from a list of compromised positions. They don't just have contacts in legitimate athletics. They control significant portions of the youth development pipeline. The scope was overwhelming. This wasn't just a criminal network operating alongside legitimate athletics. It was a criminal network that had systematically infiltrated and corrupted the institutions designed to protect young athletes. That's how they've been so successful, Dr. Malik realized. They're not outsiders preying on the athletics community. They are the athletics community, at least the parts that matter for identifying and accessing vulnerable young people. Detective Vega was studying organizational charts that showed the network's current structure. If this is accurate, they have operatives in coaching positions, recruitment offices, and administrative roles across dozens of major athletic programs. Which means, Nate said grimly, that planning this weekend's raids just became a lot more complicated. We can't trust anyone in the legitimate athletics community because we don't know who's working for the network. The revelation forced them to completely reconsider their operational plans. If the trafficking network had infiltrated the very institutions they'd been planning to coordinate with, then traditional law enforcement approaches might alert the criminals before they could rescue the victims. We need to go completely off-grid, Dr. Malik decided. No coordination with local athletics officials, no advance notice to university contacts, no communications through normal athletic administration channels. As they continued reviewing Harrison's files, one final document provided both hope and urgency. A victim manifest for the weekend conference listed 12 young people currently being held at the mountain resort, along with detailed information about their backgrounds and planned assignments. But what made Nate's blood run cold was the notation at the bottom of the manifest. Final disposition by Sunday evening. International transport arrangements confirmed. They had less than 72 hours before 12 young people disappeared forever into an international trafficking network that had been refined and strengthened by 8 years of avoiding the kind of exposure Lydia Coleman had died trying to create. The stakes had never been higher, and the odds had never been worse. But somewhere in those mountains, kids who deserved the same chance at justice that Lydia had fought for were waiting for rescue. The abandoned logging road wound through dense Pacific Northwest forest for 12 miles before reaching the coordinates Lydia had hidden in her final GPS logs. Dr. Malik's tactical team moved in complete radio silence, their vehicles spaced far enough apart to avoid detection, while maintaining visual contact through the towering Douglas firs that blocked most satellite surveillance. Nate rode in the lead vehicle with Dr. Malik and Detective Vega, studying topographical maps that showed why the trafficking network had chosen this location for their operational headquarters. The remote mountain valley was accessible only through 3 narrow passes, each easily monitored and controlled. Cell phone coverage was non-existent, and the nearest legitimate human habitation was over 30 miles away. Perfect isolation, Dr. Malik observed, marking defensive positions on her tactical map. They could operate here for months without anyone stumbling across their activities. The final piece of Lydia's GPS data had been the most crucial discovery in Harrison's files. Hidden in what appeared to be routine training session coordinates was a systematic mapping of the network's primary Pacific Northwest facility, a converted logging camp that served as both a processing center for newly trafficked victims and a staging area for international transport. Lydia was more thorough than we realized, Detective Vega said, reviewing the intelligence package that had taken months to compile. She didn't just document Harrison's activities in Seabrook. She tracked the entire regional operation back to its source. The GPS logs showed that Lydia had made at least 6 reconnaissance trips to this location between February and April 2004, each time gathering more detailed intelligence about the facility's layout, security measures, and operational patterns. Her final entries described a compound capable of housing up to 50 people, with fortified buildings that looked like a military installation rather than a legitimate training facility. She was planning to guide a raid, Nate realized, studying her carefully annotated maps. All this intelligence gathering wasn't just about exposing the network. She was providing tactical information for a rescue operation. But Lydia's most valuable contribution was her documentation of the facility's weaknesses. Her engineering student mindset had analyzed the compound's construction, identifying structural vulnerabilities, security blind spots, and potential escape routes for both rescuers and victims. Eastern approach through the old timber cutting area, Dr. Malik read from Lydia's notes. Security cameras cover main access road, but not secondary logging trails. Power generation from diesel generators housed in separate building, vulnerable to sabotage. Jamie, monitoring communications intercepts from a mobile command center positioned 5 miles from the target area, confirmed that the weekend conference was proceeding as planned. Multiple vehicles arrived since yesterday evening. License plates from California, Washington, British Columbia, and at least 3 other states I can't identify from this distance. The communications intelligence painted a chilling picture of the gathering's purpose. Intercepted phone conversations revealed that this wasn't just a business meeting. It was a celebration of the network's return to full operational capacity after 8 years of reduced activity following Lydia's investigation. They're treating this like a victory celebration, Jamie reported, toasting the end of the Coleman disruption and announcing plans to triple their operational capacity over the next 18 months. Dr. Malik's tactical assessment was sobering. The compound was defended by at least 12 armed personnel, with military-grade equipment and training. The victims were being held in a central building designed to prevent escape, surrounded by open ground that would expose anyone attempting a rescue to devastating crossfire. This isn't going to be a simple law enforcement operation, she explained to the assembled team. We're looking at a fortified position defended by people who have everything to lose and no intention of surrendering. Elena Ramos, the athletic trainer who had agreed to serve as a consultant on victim identification and medical assessment, studied photographs of the compound with growing concern. If they're holding 12 kids in that central building, any firefight puts the victims at extreme risk. These people have demonstrated they're willing to kill to protect their operation. The moral complexity of the situation weighed heavily on everyone involved. They were planning an assault that might save 12 young lives, but could just as easily result in those same lives being lost if the network decided to eliminate evidence rather than face capture. There's another consideration, Detective Vega added. Based on the communications we've intercepted, this conference includes buyers from international markets. If we can capture them during the transaction phase, we might be able to dismantle trafficking networks across multiple continents. But the international implications also raised the stakes dramatically. Some of the buyers represented criminal organizations with resources that rivaled small nations. If the raid failed, the retaliation against everyone involved in the investigation could be swift and merciless. Ben Ortiz, who had insisted on joining the operation despite the dangers, was studying the tactical maps with the eye of someone who'd spent decades navigating dangerous situations. "You're thinking about this wrong," he told Dr. Malik. "This isn't a military assault, it's a rescue operation. The priority has to be getting those kids out alive, not capturing criminals." His perspective forced a fundamental shift in their planning approach. Instead of designing an operation to maximize arrests and evidence gathering, they began focusing exclusively on victim extraction and safety. "We create multiple diversions," Ben suggested. "Draw the defenders away from the central building, while a small team extracts the victims. Let the criminals escape if necessary, as long as we save the kids." The strategy required splitting their limited resources between rescue and distraction operations, significantly increasing the risk to all participants. But it offered the best chance of achieving their primary objective, preventing 12 young people from disappearing into international trafficking networks. Jamie's technical analysis revealed another crucial factor. The compound's communication systems relied on a central satellite uplink that could be disabled remotely, cutting off the network's ability to coordinate with outside support or alert other operational cells about the raid. "If I can hack their communication system during the initial assault, they'll be operating blind," she explained. "No ability to call for reinforcements, coordinate defensive positions, or warn other network locations about law enforcement activity." Miguel Santos, the investigative journalist who had been covering the story, presented a different kind of strategic consideration. His newspaper series about missing athletes had generated national attention and political pressure for law enforcement action, but it had also alerted the network to the scope of the investigation. "My reporting bought us credibility with the public and political cover for this operation," he said. "But it also gave the network time to prepare defenses and potentially relocate critical evidence or personnel." The double-edged nature of media attention highlighted the delicate balance between public accountability and operational security. Miguel's articles had forced political leaders to support the investigation, but they had also provided the trafficking network with advance warning about law enforcement activities. Dr. Malik made the final tactical decision based on intelligence that the victims were scheduled for transport Sunday evening, less than 18 hours away. "We go in at dawn tomorrow. Simultaneous operations here and at secondary locations to prevent the network from consolidating their defenses or eliminating evidence." The plan called for coordinated raids across 7 locations in 3 states, designed to capture network leadership while preventing them from destroying evidence or harming victims. But the primary focus remained the mountain compound, where 12 young people were being held for what the network's communications described as final processing. As the team prepared for the dawn assault, Nate found himself thinking about Lydia Coleman's final recording. She had faced the same criminal network with nothing but courage and determination, knowing that her investigation might cost her everything. but believing that other young lives depended on her willingness to take that risk. Now, 8 years later, her intelligence gathering was guiding a rescue operation that could save 12 kids from the same fate that had befallen her. Her voice recordings had provided the evidence needed to build a federal case. Her GPS logs were directing them to victims who might otherwise have disappeared forever. "She's still fighting," Detective Vega said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. Every piece of evidence she gathered, every coordinate she mapped, every risk she took, it's all leading to this moment. The pre-dawn hours were spent in final preparations and equipment checks. Federal agents reviewed building schematics and escape routes. Medical personnel prepared for potential casualties and trauma victims. Communication specialists tested equipment that would coordinate the complex multi-location operation. But underlying all the technical preparations was an emotional reality that no amount of tactical planning could address. They were about to confront people who had built a criminal empire on the systematic exploitation and destruction of young lives. The moral weight of that confrontation and the responsibility to the victims counting on them for rescue created a pressure that was almost overwhelming. As the first hint of dawn light appeared through the forest canopy, Dr. Malik gave the final briefing to her assault teams. "Remember, we're not just here to arrest criminals or gather evidence. We're here to bring 12 kids home to their families. Everything else is secondary to that mission." The radio crackled with confirmation signals from teams positioned around the compound perimeter. After 8 years of investigation, months of planning, and a night of final preparations, they were ready to finish what Lydia Coleman had started on a spring evening in 2004, when she decided that some truths were worth dying for. The assault began at 5:47 a.m., with Jamie's cyber attack disabling the compound's satellite communications. From his position in the tree line, Nate watched through night vision goggles as the facility's external lights flickered and died, plunging the compound into darkness that would give the rescue teams crucial tactical advantage. Dr. Malik's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Communications down. Power grid compromised. All teams, initiate Phase 1. Ben's diversion plan worked perfectly. Explosive charges detonated simultaneously at 3 points around the compound perimeter, creating the impression of a large-scale military assault from multiple directions. The defenders immediately rushed toward the apparent threats, leaving the central building where the victims were held with minimal security. Nate moved with Detective Vega and Elena Ramos through the eastern approach Lydia had identified in her reconnaissance notes. The old timber-cutting area provided perfect cover, and Lydia's intelligence about security blind spots proved accurate even 8 years later. They reached the central building without encountering resistance. 12 heat signatures confirmed inside, Dr. Malik reported from her command position. Basement level, northwest corner. Minimal movement patterns suggest restraints or sedation. Elena's medical training became crucial as they entered the building. The victims they found were young athletes between 15 and 19 years old, representing the kind of elite talent that had made them targets for the trafficking network. But they were also traumatized, drugged, and in some cases physically injured from attempts to escape or resist. "We're here to help," Elena said softly to a girl who couldn't have been more than 16, using the calm, professional tone she'd perfected during years of working with injured athletes. "We're going to get you home to your families." The rescue operation revealed the horrific efficiency of the trafficking network's methods. The victims had been systematically broken down through isolation, drugs, and psychological manipulation designed to make them compliant for sale to buyers who valued both physical capability and mental submission. But as they evacuated the first group of victims, Nate discovered something that changed everything about their understanding of Lydia's final days. Hidden behind a loose brick in the basement wall was a waterproof envelope containing a handwritten letter dated April 23, 2004. The day of her disappearance. "If someone finds this letter, it means they killed me, and you're finally here to rescue the others," Lydia had written in careful block letters. "I hid this evidence because I knew they would try to destroy everything else." The letter contained names, dates, and locations that filled crucial gaps in their investigation. Lydia had not only documented the Pacific Northwest operation, but had connected it to trafficking networks across North America. Her final intelligence gathering had identified the network's leadership structure, financial systems, and operational methods with the precision of a trained intelligence analyst. She knew she was going to die, Detective Vega said, reading over Nate's shoulder as explosions and gunfire echoed from other parts of the compound. But she kept working to save other kids right up until the end. The letter also revealed why Lydia had been so effective at uncovering the network's secrets. Her Interpol contact had been providing her with intelligence gathering techniques and communication security methods that allowed her to conduct investigation activities without detection by the trafficking organization's security measures. Detective Maria Rodriguez, International Criminal Police Organization, Vancouver Division. Nate read from the letter. She taught me how to hide evidence, how to create multiple backup systems, how to document everything so that someone could continue the investigation if they eliminated me. But Lydia's final revelation was the most shocking. The letter contained detailed descriptions of network buyers she had observed during her reconnaissance of the compound, including photographs and license plate numbers that identified international criminal organizations, corrupt government officials, and wealthy private collectors from multiple countries. This isn't just about rescuing these 12 kids. Dr. Malik's voice came through their earpieces as she reviewed digital copies of the letter. Lydia documented an international trafficking marketplace that we can use to dismantle buyer networks across 3 continents. The tactical situation around the compound was deteriorating rapidly. Harrison's security team had realized that the perimeter explosions were diversions and were attempting to regain control of the central building. Dr. Malik ordered immediate evacuation of all victims and essential personnel. "We've got what we came for," she announced. 12 victims secured, primary intelligence recovered. All teams, execute extraction protocols. But as they moved the rescued victims toward evacuation vehicles, Nate encountered Coach Marcus Harrison himself, attempting to flee through the same eastern approach they had used to enter the compound. The confrontation was inevitable. Harrison couldn't reach the escape route without going through them, and there was nowhere else for him to run. "Nate Alvarez," Harrison said, his voice carrying the same confident authority he'd used to manipulate young athletes for over a decade. The salvage diver who couldn't leave well enough alone. Even cornered and facing capture, Harrison maintained the charismatic presence that had made him so effective at gaining trust and exploiting vulnerability. But now Nate could see past the facade to the calculating predator underneath. "You killed Lydia Coleman," Nate said, keeping his weapon trained on Harrison while positioning himself between the coach and the evacuation route. "I saved Lydia Coleman from a life of mediocrity," Harrison replied with twisted conviction. "She would have run track for 4 years in college, maybe made the Olympics if she was lucky, then spent the rest of her life teaching elementary school in some forgotten town. Instead, she became part of something larger, something that touched lives across the globe." The casual dismissal of murder as somehow beneficial revealed the depth of Harrison's psychological corruption. He genuinely believed that destroying young lives was a form of salvation, that trafficking was a service he provided to athletes who didn't understand their own potential. "She was 17 years old," Detective Vega said, moving into position to support Nate, while Elena continued evacuating victims. "She had her whole life ahead of her." "She had a small life ahead of her," Harrison corrected. "Limited by conventional thinking, restricted by society's narrow definition of success. The network provided opportunities that went far beyond anything legitimate athletics could offer." The megalomania was staggering. Harrison had convinced himself that he was providing opportunities rather than destroying lives, that trafficking was liberation rather than enslavement. It was the psychology of every predator who justifies exploitation as somehow beneficial to the victims. "You drugged kids, sold them to buyers, separated them from their families forever," Nate said. "How is that an opportunity?" "Because it freed them from the limitations of ordinary existence," Harrison replied, with the fervor of someone who'd spent years rationalizing evil. Do you think Sarah Mitchell would have been happier working in some office job in Portland or experiencing the world as part of an exclusive international community? The reference to one of the missing athletes from Lydia's recordings made Nate's stomach turn. Harrison was talking about a girl who'd been trafficked as if she'd won some kind of prize rather than being victimized by systematic exploitation. But the conversation was interrupted by the arrival of additional federal agents who had secured the rest of the compound. Dr. Malik approached with evidence containers that would preserve Lydia's letter and the other intelligence they'd recovered from the facility. "Marcus Harrison," she said formally, "you're under arrest for human trafficking, conspiracy, kidnapping, and murder. The International Criminal Court will also be filing charges related to crimes against humanity." As Harrison was led away in restraints, he made one final statement that revealed the full scope of his delusion. "You think you've won something here, but you've only delayed the inevitable. The demand for what we provide will always exist. There will always be buyers, and there will always be suppliers to meet their needs." The chilling truth was that Harrison might be right about the demand side of trafficking markets, but what he failed to understand was that people like Lydia Coleman, who chose courage over safety in the fight against exploitation, would also always exist to oppose networks like his. The immediate aftermath of the raid revealed the operation's success beyond their most optimistic projections. All 12 current victims were rescued alive and would be reunited with families who had spent months or years believing their children were pursuing legitimate athletic opportunities. None of the rescued athletes had been seriously injured, though all would require extensive medical and psychological support to recover from their traumatization. Simultaneous raids across 7 locations had netted 43 arrests, including regional coordinators, buyer network representatives, and corrupted athletic officials who had facilitated trafficking operations. The evidence seized included financial records spanning over a decade, communication logs revealing international connections, and victim identification materials that would help locate other missing athletes. But perhaps most importantly, they had recovered Lydia's complete intelligence package, not just the voice recordings and GPS data from the flash drive, but also the systematic documentation of network operations she had compiled over months of investigation. Her letter alone contained enough information to guide follow-up operations across multiple countries. She built the roadmap for dismantling the entire network, Dr. Malik explained to the assembled team as they processed evidence in the temporary command center. Names, locations, methods, financial systems, everything we need to trace this operation back to its roots and forward to its current extent. Jamie's technical analysis of communications equipment seized during the raids confirmed that the trafficking network had been operating at a scale far beyond what any of them had imagined. Server logs showed connections to similar operations across North America, Europe, and Asia, suggesting a global trafficking system that moved hundreds of victims annually. This wasn't just a regional operation with international connections, Jamie reported. It was a continental hub in a global trafficking network that spans every continent except Antarctica. Elena's medical evaluation of the rescued victims provided crucial intelligence about the network's operational methods. The systematic drugging, psychological manipulation, and physical conditioning revealed sophisticated understanding of how to break down resistance and create compliant victims for various buyer markets. They were using techniques developed by military and intelligence agencies for interrogation and control, Elena explained. These weren't amateur criminals. They had access to advanced psychological and medical resources. But despite the horror of what they'd uncovered, the rescue operation had succeeded in its primary mission. 12 young people who had been scheduled for international transport and permanent disappearance were instead going home to families who had feared they might never see their children again. Miguel Santos, who had been documenting the operation for his newspaper series, captured the emotional reality of the rescue in interviews with victims' families. Parents who had been told their children were pursuing elite athletic opportunities were learning that those children had actually been trafficked by the very people they'd trusted to guide their athletic development. The betrayal of trust is almost as devastating as the trafficking itself, Miguel wrote in his coverage of the raids. These families believed they were providing opportunities for their children's dreams to come true. Instead, they were unknowingly delivering their kids to predators who saw athletic talent as a commodity to be harvested and sold. As dawn broke fully over the mountain compound, Nate found himself standing where Lydia Coleman had conducted her final reconnaissance 8 years earlier. The facility was now swarming with federal agents, medical personnel, and victim support specialists working to document evidence and care for the rescued athletes. But in the midst of all the official activity, Nate took a moment to read Lydia's letter one more time. Her words carried across 8 years with the same determination and courage that had driven her to risk everything for the chance to save other young lives. "I know I probably won't survive long enough to see these kids rescued," she had written, "but I believe that someone will eventually find this evidence and use it to finish what I started. Don't let my death be meaningless. Don't let these other kids disappear the way I'm about to disappear. And please tell my mom that I died fighting for something that mattered." The letter ended with a list of coordinates and contact information that would guide investigators to additional evidence caches Lydia had hidden across the Pacific Northwest. Even facing death, she had been thinking strategically about how to maximize the impact of her investigation and ensure that her evidence would survive to protect other potential victims. Detective Vega joined Nate as he finished reading the letter. "She kept fighting right up until the end," she said quietly. "Even when she knew they were coming for her, she was still trying to save other kids." The morning sun was burning off the forest mist, revealing the full scope of the compound that had served as a hub for international trafficking operations. But what struck Nate most powerfully was the realization that this moment, the rescue of 12 victims and the dismantling of a criminal network, was the direct result of a 17-year-old girl's decision to choose courage over safety 8 years earlier. Lydia Coleman had died believing that someone would eventually find her evidence and use it to save the kids she couldn't protect herself. Today, that belief had finally been vindicated. 6 months after the mountain compound raid, Nate stood at the edge of the newly constructed Lydia Coleman Memorial Track, watching teenage runners practice under the Oregon afternoon sun. The facility had been built with settlement money from lawsuits against the corrupted athletic organizations. But more importantly, it represented a living memorial to a young woman whose courage had saved dozens of lives. The trials had concluded with unprecedented convictions. Coach Marcus Harrison received life imprisonment without parole, along with 42 other network members who were sentenced to terms ranging from 20 years to life. International prosecutions were ongoing across 17 countries, with Lydia's intelligence continuing to guide operations that had rescued over 200 trafficking victims worldwide. Karen Coleman emerged from the track facility's administrative building, carrying a clipboard and wearing the same determined expression her daughter had shown in those final photographs. She had transformed her grief into action, becoming the facility's director and a nationally recognized advocate for athletic safety reforms. "The afternoon training group is getting faster every week," Karen told Nate as they watched the runners complete their intervals. Lydia would have loved seeing kids train without having to worry about who they could trust. The memorial track represented more than just athletic infrastructure. It embodied systemic changes that had revolutionized youth sports safety. New oversight protocols, mandatory background investigations, and independent reporting systems had been implemented across every major athletic organization in North America. Dr. Malik, who now headed a specialized FBI task force for athletic exploitation cases, had used Lydia's evidence to establish international cooperation protocols that prevented trafficking networks from simply relocating when confronted by local law enforcement. Her unit had become the model for similar programs in 12 other countries. Detective Vega approached from the parking area, carrying flowers she placed at the small memorial garden adjacent to the track. She made this pilgrimage every month, maintaining a connection with the case that had defined her career and restored her faith in the possibility of justice for forgotten victims. "Any word on the latest rescues?" Karen asked. 17 more kids found in Eastern Europe last week, Vega replied, all traced back to intelligence from Lydia's files. The network she exposed is still helping us find victims 8 years after her death. Jamie Tran had developed a secure reporting application that allowed young athletes to document concerns about coaches, trainers, or programs without fear of retaliation. The app had been downloaded over 2 million times and had generated investigations that prevented countless potential trafficking situations. Ben Ortiz maintained the memorial track's equipment and facilities, finding purpose in protecting the place that honored the girl whose evidence had exposed humanity's capacity for both evil and redemption. His workshop had become an unofficial gathering place for families of trafficking survivors, offering practical support and shared understanding. Elena Ramos now served as a national consultant for sports medicine ethics, ensuring that the medical profession's involvement in trafficking operations could never again be hidden behind claims of legitimate treatment and training. Miguel Santos's Pulitzer Prize-winning series about the trafficking network had generated legislation requiring transparency in youth athletic programs and creating federal funding for victim support services. As the afternoon training session concluded, Nate reflected on how Lydia Coleman's voice recordings had transformed from evidence of one girl's murder into a comprehensive guide for protecting thousands of young athletes. Her final act of courage continued to resonate across continents and through generations. The teenage runners gathered around their coach for final instructions, their laughter carrying across the track where Lydia's name was permanently inscribed in bronze letters that caught the afternoon light. Somewhere in that sound was the echo of dreams protected, futures preserved, and the enduring power of one person's decision to choose truth over safety. Lydia Coleman had died at 17, but her legacy would live forever in every young athlete who could train without fear, compete without exploitation, and pursue their dreams, knowing that people like her had fought to make those dreams possible. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.